Have you ever experienced a moment in your life that was so painful and confusing that all you wanted to do was learn as much as you could to make sense of it all? When I was 13, a close family friend, who was like an uncle to me, passed away from pancreatic cancer. When the disease hit so close to home, I knew I needed to learn more. So I went online to find answers. And using the internet, I found a variety of statistics on pancreatic cancer. And what I had found shocked me. Over 85% of all pancreatic cancers are diagnosed late. When someone has less than a 2% chance of survival, why are we so bad at detecting pancreatic cancer? The reason our current modern medicine is a 60-year-old technique. I mean, it's older than my dad. But also, it costs $800 per test and is grossly inaccurate, missing 30% of all pancreatic cancers. And your doctor would have to be ridiculously suspicious that you have the cancer in order to give you this test. And then all of a sudden I was thinking, maybe there's a better way to do this. And so then I set out on this grand adventure armed with 8th grade biology to change cancer diagnostics. Pretty lofty goal in retrospect. However, I went online and saw what a sensor for pancreatic cancer would really have to look like in order to be effective at diagnosing it. The sensor would have to be inexpensive, rapid, simple, sensitive, selective, and minimally invasive. Now, I was pretty sure I could do this, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it. And so then I just went back online, and what I found is that the reason why we haven't updated this sensor for over 6 decades is because when we're looking at your cancer, we're looking in your bloodstream, particularly for these different proteins and changes in their levels. And this sounds really straightforward, but it's anything but. Because essentially you have these liters and liters of blood that's already abundant in those proteins. And you're looking for this tiny increase in this tiny amount of protein. And so it's next to impossible. It's kind of like trying to find a needle in a stack of nearly identical needles. So, undeterred due to my teenage optimism, or how many people label it, ignorance of the entire field, I essentially went back to any teenager's best source for information, Google and Wikipedia, how I got through every one of my high school tests. And essentially I found a database of over 8,000 different proteins that you have in your bloodstream when you have these different cancers. And since it was summer break and I had literally nothing else to do, I decided to go on a grand protein hunting marathon. Kind of felt like I was playing this one game called Pokemon, where you have to catch all these different things, but instead here it's catch all the proteins, and it kind of drives you insane after a while. And so I just start going through this. I locked myself in my room on the computer, and at the end of the summer, I was really doubting my possibility for any future social interaction. After searching through 4,000 proteins, oh, what did you do this summer? Oh, I went traveling and went backpacking. Oh, I sat in my room and did protein research. I was that kid. So essentially, on the 4,000th try, I finally found one protein that could possibly work, and I was pretty excited. And the name of this protein is called mesothelin. And it's just your ordinary run-of-the-mill type protein, unless, of course, you have pancreatic, ovarian, and lung cancer, in which case it's found at these very high levels in your bloodstream, but also it's found in the earliest stages of the disease, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So now that I had found a protein that could work, I then shifted my focus to the actual problem at hand, detecting that protein, and thus pancreatic cancer. Now, my kind of epiphany moment here, it was this key moment where everything fell into place for me, came in the most unlikely of places. High school biology class, absolute stifler of innovation, particularly with my evil high school biology teacher. I hated her, and she hated me. It was the Jack versus Miss Chandra wars in there. And essentially one day I decided to stab her through the ribs and bring in an article on actual science, carbon nanotubes, not mundane fact memorizing. And carbon nanotubes are these long, thin pipes of carbon, atom thick, and 1/50,000th the diameter of your hair. So they're extremely small, and they have these incredible properties. They're kind of like the superheroes of material science. So I had snuck this in, and it was kind of like I was sneaking in a comic book. I wedged it into my biology textbook. I wasn't really interested in what we were doing that day. And I just was suavely reading it under the desk, like, oh yeah, you're not going to catch me. I'm too cool for you. And then what happens is we're learning about these things called antibodies. And you all know what antibodies are, these molecules that only react with one protein. Then I'm just sitting there, kind of being lulled to sleep by her droning. And then all of a sudden, it hits me. I essentially combine these two things. I just slap them together. Take some antibodies, and you weave them into a network of nanotubes, such that you have a network that only reacts with one specific protein. But also, due to the properties of these nanotubes, this network will actually change how electricity flows through it based on the amount of that one protein present. And thus, I can tell you whether or not you have pancreatic cancer based on how much of a change there is. It's actually really simple to measure this change. You essentially take an ohm meter that you steal from your dad's garage, and you just plug it on, and you can measure the resistance in 5 minutes. And there's one catch, though. See, these networks of nanotubes are really flimsy. And since they're so delicate, they need to be supported, of course. And so I chose to use paper. And making a paper sensor for pancreatic cancer is about as simple as making chocolate chip cookies, which I love. They're like my vice. If I get a B on a test, there goes the chocolate chip cookies. But what happened is you essentially take some water, you pour the nanotubes in them, add some antibodies, mix it up, take some paper, dip it, dry it, and then you can detect cancer. And that's a bit of an oversimplification, of course. I mean, you have to do some actual optimization and Western blotch, which I hate. But then, as soon as I had this epiphany moment, all of a sudden, my biology teacher whirls around, gives me this stink eye. She's like, Mr. Andraka, what are you reading? And she snatches this article out of my hands. She's like, what is this actual science doing in my class? She didn't say that, but that's what I thought would be really what she was thinking, because, oh, did I hate her. But finally, after class, I finally got this huge spiel on self-respect and respecting the teacher and paying attention in class, all this boring stuff that I didn't care about really. And I kind of just toned her out and just was thinking, when is she going to shut up? And then finally, after 30 minutes of enduring that pain, I got the article. Now I could start doing some actual research. And then, all of a sudden, I realized I might need a lab for this. See, I can't have the Andraka Household Cancer Research Program. I mean, I've been doing some pretty crazy stuff. I mean, we're on the FBI watch list. Well, my mom is, since we use her credit card. I mean, we have this giant lead pig of uranium ore just sitting in our basement next to our vats of chlorine gas that we made. And then we have high voltage electronics, and I even cultured E. coli where we make sandwiches. So it's we did some pretty sketchy stuff, but cancer research, that's a bit stretching it for my mom. So I decided I'm going to get into a lab. That should be easy enough, right? This is a pretty cool idea. They'll like it, right? So I sent out a 32-page behemoth of a paper, including all of my resources, my everything from materials list, the timeline, budget, structured down to pennies. It was pretty detailed. I sent it out, and I'm like, oh, everyone's just going to accept me, right? Everyone's just going to be running over themselves, and I'll be able to pick and choose, and I'll be on time, genius kid. No, my lofty dreams soon crashed into the ground because I got 199 rejections out of those 200 emails. And I realized throughout this, professors aren't nearly as nice as their profile pictures make them seem. I mean, they were really mean. They'd the red ink would come out, and once you get the red ink, you know it's over for you. And then, throughout all of this, after a month of getting just rejection after rejection, finally got one maybe at Dr. Aaron Bonmacher's lab at Johns Hopkins University. And I think, okay, I'm for sure getting in here. He just said oh, maybe you can look at my lab through from 50 feet away, outside. But I was I'm definitely getting in there, right? So I go in to look at his lab, and I have like these huge stacks of like 500 plus journal articles. I go in and I'm like, this is going to be a classic interview. Like, what's your favorite color? Why are you here? How old are you? Easy stuff like that, right? Oh no, he asked some pretty tough questions. He actually knew what he was talking about, unfortunately. Couldn't bamboozle him like I could my parents, just like throw in some large words like, of course that pathway is being mediated by carbon nanotubes, yes. No, I actually had to like explain science to him. And he called in 28 PhDs into this 9-foot by 9-foot room. They were just throwing these questions, and after swaying it out for an hour, I guessed C on so many of those questions I could do on SATs, I finally got the lab space I needed. Just as soon as I got in, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I had 0 lab experience, and I'm just sitting there. I'm like, oh, well, what do I do? And so I'm like wandering around, knocking stuff over. But finally, like, they get me on track, and first thing I do is sneeze in my cell culture. And like, cells have an immune system, right? They'll be fine. They'll fight it off. It's going to be like the flu. Just feed them some Gatorade. It'll be good, right? I come in the next morning, and it's like monster from the Loch Ness swamp, like in there, like with tentacles. I'm like, oh my God, what is that? So we like burned that or whatever we did with it. The next day, I'm super excited to go, and I'm going to nail this. It's going to be perfect. I drop my cell cultures. The day after that, I burn them, like in the incubator. I freeze them. It was bad. And then I got to the Western blot. And that's where I had to optimize my antibody that I was using. Because little unbeknownst to me, there are apparently 80 different antibodies for mesothelin. I'm like, what? I thought there was only one antibody. That's the point of an antibody. There's only one key to the lock. Oh no, I had a bit of a misconception there. But finally, I got through the Western blot, and I screwed it up 80 times over and over and over again. And I would like spend nights there. I'd like create a little like mat of scientific journals to sleep on, like pull a blanket and like cry myself to sleep while eating a Twix bar. Like, why isn't it working? However, finally, I ended up with one small paper sensor that costs 3 cents and takes 5 minutes to run. This makes it 168 times faster, over 26,000 times less expensive, and over 400 times more sensitive than our current method of detection. But also, I tested it on 100 patient samples, and what I found is it has close to 100% accuracy and can detect the cancer in the earliest stage, when someone has close to 100% chance of survival. So, in the next 2 to 5 years, this patent-pending sensor could potentially lift that survival rate of 5.5% to close to 100%, and reduce it would do similar for ovarian and lung cancer. But also, what's so cool is this is kind of like a platform to detect any disease, because you can change out that antibody and detect a completely different protein, meaning a different disease, range from Alzheimer's, other forms of cancer, even HIV, AIDS, and malaria or heart disease. And so it has all these applications, and what I found is I could also monitor what drugs you're already going to be resistant to, that your cancer is resistant to, and then also see how well your chemotherapy regimen is working. And so it's pretty cool what's going on with this. However, throughout this entire process, I faced like a lot of adversity. I mean, 199 no's, my self-esteem kind of like plunged after that. Plus like the biology teachers told me no, my parents told me no. I mean, at least they didn't tell me to make like a papier-mâché volcano. However, the greatest adversity I faced was definitely paywalls. You see, 90% of all scientific journals have paywalls, meaning that if you want that article, you have to cough up $35. Say all of a sudden you realize that article has nothing to do with your research. Well, then there's no return policy, you're just $35 out. Well, my parents were in this case, because they paid for everything, which was pretty nice. And then what I realized when I went to all these scientific competitions is all of my peers thought the exact same thing. I mean, we got a bit creative, like we would go on Google and like look to like pirate them off these different sites, or like, for example, we could like email the lead author, but oftentimes this led to countless hours being wasted, and eventually we gave and just have to spend the money. So I spent possibly $1,000 plus on this research just to get the background information I needed. I mean, that's a lot of weeks of allowance. And what I found is that these paywalls have killed so many different scientific ideas at my school and all around the nation just because we simply can't afford these articles. Because scientific research should just be as accessible as iTunes and the world of pop culture and stuff. I mean, why are scientific articles 35 times the new Katy Perry signal? I don't really get that. And this isn't just a problem for 15-year-olds. This is a problem for literally everyone. I mean, Harvard University recently released a statement saying major periodical subscriptions, especially to electronic journals published by historically key providers, cannot be sustained. Continuing these subscriptions on their current footing is financially untenable. Now, what does it say about the world of academic publishing, accessibility of knowledge, and flow of information when Harvard University, the richest academic institution in the world, can't afford its articles? I mean, how's a 15-year-old supposed to cough that up? By instituting these paywalls, we've created this really rigid knowledge class system, where essentially we have the knowledge elite, those research scientists that can afford all these articles, or those working in corporate labs, and even here we have a bit of segregation. We have knowledge like billionaires, those large research institutions like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, they can all afford these articles, right? Well, then there's the knowledge millionaires, people like Towson University or like state-funded universities that don't have the same access. And so we're basically discriminating your access to knowledge based on how much money your university has. I mean, that's not right. And then we have the knowledge middle class, people like you or me. We don't really have access to these articles, but at least we can read like the 10% that's openly available. Plus, we can kind of read like the abstracts, maybe pirate a few articles. And we also have access to the internet. But then there's the knowledge underclass. 5.5 billion people who don't have access to the internet, and thus absolutely zero access to any scientific knowledge whatsoever. So essentially, 0.008%, 8/1000ths of 1 percentage point, that's how many people have access to scientific articles in the world. Those 5.6 million research scientists. And then there's the other 80% of the world, those knowledge underclass, who have zero access to that. I mean, there's this huge knowledge aristocracy that's going on right now. And that's just not fair. We have to have a knowledge democracy, because imagine, what if no matter where you're from, whether you're from Morocco to India to the US to China, it wouldn't matter if you're a billionaire or living on less than $1 a day, that you'd have the exact same access to that knowledge. Because a girl in Pakistan should have just the same exact knowledge as someone living here and going to a super prestigious university. Because that is equality. Because science should not be a luxury and knowledge should not be a commodity. It should be a basic human right. Because the minds of the people, they have to be free, and that means the minds of everyone, not the minds of the select few that can afford these articles. Because science has to be agnostic to all of these factors, money or like where you're from. It shouldn't matter about that. It should matter about what your ideas are and how you can make them true. And knowledge shouldn't be a barrier to that. And we should really have to change that, because when 80% of the people lack access to the internet, and then 90% of all articles on the internet aren't accessible to people, we have a problem. Because knowledge is the great equalizer of the world. Because it doesn't matter who you are if you have knowledge. It just matters how you use it. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Hispanic, Asian. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're poor, if you're rich. It just matters how you're going to use that knowledge and help change the world. Because knowledge empowers all of us to come up with great ideas and change the world. And I believe everyone should have that opportunity. So we have to abolish this knowledge middle class and knowledge underclass and elevate to the same level as the knowledge elite. And I believe that we can do this. Because if a 15-year-old who didn't quite know what a pancreas was could find a new way to detect pancreatic cancer, just imagine what we all could do together. Thank you.